the great pleasure of meeting Professor Zonneveld from the Netherlands. He has been Professor of Physical Geography at the University of Utrecht. Now he's retired, but very actively involved in research and organizing a group, international group, concerned about the synthesis within the field of geography. He's also on a government commission in Holland concerning environmental impact assessment. So, it should be very interesting to hear about your life experience, what were the formative influences on your thinking, and then we can come back to this very interesting question of synthesis, physical and human actions.
Where do you want to begin, to start with?
Where you were born.
Well, I was born at the mouth of a river, Kampen, Netherlands. One of the Hanse towns, but I don't remember very much of that because my parents moved when I was 2, so I had no recollections of that time from this beautiful old narrow town. Afterwards I lived in the western part of the Netherlands, the polder area, on a level of, let's say, about sea level. When we made some walk, then we went down to 1 meter below sea level, and it was a normal thing that when you then saw a kind of river or a ditch or a canal and you went up and you saw the ships floating there. That was the situation, a man-made country, and that was normal for us. When I afterwards had visitors from abroad, let's say an American colleague, then for me it was nothing serious to go to that area and going up when you have a river and going down when there's... But he wanted to make photographs, and then I thought, well, there's something special, especially with this kind of landscape. Well, that is, let's say, period of my boyhood. I wanted to be a geographer. You don't know what is that. But we had geography on school. Oh no, before I went to school, yes. I got an atlas from my father. It was an old atlas, 1914, before the First World War. And, well, I was a boy of 4, 5, and I saw all those rivers and all those countries and the seas and so on. I wanted to follow those lines, without reading, of course, the place names, but this space, these realms of different colors. I know in those atlas France was violet and Germany was a little bit orange, and England, Great Britain had a rose color. Sweden had, well, this is all I remember, this map. I wanted to follow it. When at 6 I went to school. How do you call this kind of school? Primary school. And then, yes, I hoped to have geography on the maps, but there was nothing. No. That just starts in the 3rd year. At first you have to learn to read, of course. Well, after 2 years I could read something, and I saw that in the next year we would have geography at school. That was very interesting because in my atlas at home I was studying all those difficult words like Yangtze Kiang and Mekong and Huangro and all those Afghanistan, all those difficult words I had trained. And I came at school and I hoped we have now geography of the world, of course. I should like to see all those things. And then it was a very good school. They started not with the map of the world, but with the map of the class. The map of the class in which you saw the various places of the pupils and the blackboard and the place of the teacher. And so we were, well, trained, you could say, in seeing a map and seeing the reality. It was a marvelously how do you pedagogical start, but for me it was a disappointment. You can understand.
Yes,
I knew it. This was a map, and that's the reality. Afterwards, a map of the school, and then a map of the village we lived in, and then a map of the province, and then a map of the Netherlands. But it was old for me. I had studied all these things just before the atlas of my father. I regret very much that this atlas has lost now. It must have been a very beautiful thing. Well, this is the start.
Great.
But then I forget all those things, and I wanted to be a pilot in the air, flying, seeing the clouds. Yes, the airplanes were things that you could lift yourself up and seeing the world, but not only the world, but floating in the air and seeing clouds and all those things. Then there was a possibility to study at the university, but it was time of crisis, and my parents said me, well, it must be possible for you to study at the university. We will not have holidays, and we will try to spend the money for that. Well, what do you want?
Years are we?
That was 36. Oh, that was a beautiful thing. I never had the idea that it would be possible. I wanted to be a pilot, or if not, I have spectacles, so that was impossible. Then doing something in the aircraft industry, drawing perhaps or something, very technically, but I'm not so technical. But then drawing, making drawings, being involved with aircrafts. But my parents said, well, it must be possible. We will try to have the money for it. You can study. What do you want to study? Well, geography was to be studied in Utrecht. And that was some 30 kilometers. So you had to hire their house. But Leiden was 15 kilometers. And that was possible to do it by bicycle. Yes. But there was no geography. It doesn't matter. I had forgotten that geography was something so, as if science was so important. I wanted to see the world, and that was possible too by studying geology. And so I started studying geology.
Geology, at Leiden.
At Leiden, 1936. And after 3 years the war came. And I just had my candidate's examination. I was just in Italy for the first time in the Alps as a young boy when the war broke out, and I was high in the mountains, and with the last train I could go to home. And then we were shut up for 5 years. We had the possibility to not to finish our studies, but I always say, don't tell it to other people. I never had a complete university training. The degree I got, but the funny thing is, not funny, there were no possibility to study really. You could study the books, but the practice you need was impossible. So I got my papers, but tell it to nobody else. I got my belts, how do you call them? The diplomas. And I promised that the field work and the excursions I would do later. And I'm still working on that, you know.
You certainly had
I'm still studying, I'm still working on field excursions and so on. But long and very long times after that moment, I always had a feeling, seeing students who had their first examination, then were working for their doctoral, they were the older and better educated than I was. Just from the moment that I was you could say a professor, I never studied the second part of my work. I had to do it myself.
Well, in one way you could say your education was very successful because it gave you curiosity and the feeling that there was still a lot to be done.
Oh, that's true.
Yes.
Still, yes, you're quite
Then
right.
you went on to doctoral work?
Well, my doctoral work was Well, was especially it was possible during the war. You know, in the Netherlands, many people, students and also geologists, were locked by the war. And the German occupator wanted to have these people for use in the in the army or doing work yes, and in the frontier of Russia as geologists. Of course, nobody wanted, so we had to go underground.
Yeah.
My brother had to go underground, and he lived really 4 years in the Biesbos, the only jungle of the Netherlands. Well, there's a history. If you see him, you must ask him. He doesn't tell too much about that, but he lived as a boy of 16, from his 16th until his 19th or 20th, in underground, in the jungle, in the kind of forests in southeast western Netherlands. But I had the opportunity to enter a group in which officially some older people, the director of the coal mines, had said, well, we can use these people and collect them and have them working in the mines, because everybody thought that the war would not be longer than 1 year, or 1 or 2 years. In that time, could be possible to have these geologists working for the future of the Netherlands. And then the Germans thought that this would be something for the production, because they thought, of course, that the war would be over, but then the Netherlands would be a German. So, and we thought, well, it will be the other way around. At any rate, there was a possibility to work together on behalf of not the coal mining itself, but the future, the geological reconnaissance of the subsoil.
There was still need for reconnaissance.
Oh
Of
yes,
geological.
Netherlands. Well, every square meter has been the subject of research and has been surveyed. But there are two things. There was a new approach with the geophysical work, and in this geophysical service I was involved. But not as a geophysicist, but as a geologist who would have a survey of the surface of the Quaternary and then try to find the tectonics that could be found on the surface and then connect them with the results of the geophysicist. Well, in that time there was a very good scientist. Edelman was his name. He started as not a chemist, but a mining engineer. He became a sedimentologist. He went over to the geology of the Netherlands, and afterwards he moved to the historical geography. It was a very, very good scientist. In the time that he was just 30 years, he made, together with Douglas, one of his colleagues, he used the methods of heavy minerals in sand, making investigations on sand. When I was asked in this geophysical survey to study the surface layers, they had said, well, then you could use the methods that are existing, counting gravels, and go ahead. But then I thought it must be possible, if you use that, how could I, as a young people without any experience, how could I do it better than the people who has done it already? Because all that area had been mapped already. But then I thought this method of Edelman perhaps could give some results. Well, I had good luck. The whole geological stratigraphy of that area had to be upset. There were 3 stratigraphical layers in that time on the map. Well, I found 21.
My goodness.
And why? Yes, I always say it's good luck, but you must, of course, have want to use a new method. And then I saw that it was possible to recognize in the sand the influence of the Rhine and the Meuse and the interference of them, to recognize if it's blown sand or not. On the existing map, many terraces, some terraces had been discerned, and I could see that some of those terraces were no terraces, and the sands were no river sands, but blown sands, and so on. So it was a marvelous puzzle, and you have these jigsaw puzzles. Well, I liked it very much, and sitting on the map with all those data, you could try to, if the Rhine comes here, then it is impossible to have it there, and so I spent a beautiful time. It was the time of the war, and I always had the idea, I'm sitting here and other people have trouble. There was no food, it's true. Sometimes you had to go to find something, to ask for something, but you could say we had good luck. The house where I should want to live was bombed, but we found something else, and so on. In the meantime, and that is the thing, you have your scientific direction, and you feel perhaps a little bit guilty that you were so lucky and that other people had not. But I had this jigsaw puzzle of the southeastern Netherlands, and there we had our doctoral work. My dissertation was on that way. And yes, the good luck was that from that moment on, together with the work of other people, pollen analysis, this is one of the pillars in which the new stratigraphy of the Netherlands have been built.
Fantastic. You mentioned the war in passing.
Yes, indeed.
Now, it's very hard for people who haven't experienced such a time to imagine how it affects people. Can you describe how it affected you, beyond just the fact that you had pity for everybody else that were in the war, that you had your scientific work to preoccupy you, but in general, what impact do you think those years have had on your consciousness?
Various. Well, let's start with one. When I see people in one of our rich countries eating something and throwing the rest in the trash, impossible.
Yes.
When I see that on the street you see a piece of bread, same.
Yes.
But there's something, it could be dangerous for your health. If I have something too much on my plate, I'm eating until it's empty.
You have to eat it, yes.
And that is the same when we were on excursions. We used youth hostels, and then you have your lunch packet with some pieces of bread. And then each day you have a new one. And then one of the students said, why don't you use your lunch packet? I said, I had something from yesterday. But that's old. I said, no, it's food. Well, that is one of the things, but just a minor thing. The other is, what you said, the difference between, you could say, the fate of people. I myself, as I said it, could feel guilty that I had the opportunity to go on with my scientific work, while other people who had chosen not especially scientific work, but being underground and fighting, they had quite another life than I had. Yes, I had, of course, the possibility to choose also that other way, but I didn't. And then, that was a very nearly tragic situation on the moment of my graduation, when I had defended my thesis. There was a friend of my father his age, coming on the reception afterwards. And then suddenly he broke out in tears and everybody asked, why? And then my father told me his son was working in a scientific work, I don't know what discipline, but he was working on that, but in the same moment he was in the underground movement. And then a few days before the war was ended, he was shot.
Oh, good Lord. Oh. So
I can understand. Yes.
Yes.
These are well, it happened every day.
Yes. But I meant, when you were a boy, the world was a pretty map in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted to follow it. It
Mm-hmm.
was a world that was reasonably friendly, if not just neutral.
Mm-hmm.
But after the war, what was your image of reality?
Well, after the war I was a little bit older, but still rather young, you can calculate. That world was a new world because the world was over.
Yes.
So you were optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
All was good now because the world was over.
Mm-hmm.
Then, if you put your question in that direction, I tried to be a geologist, and my geological and scientific approach was this. I like to study nature.
Mm-hmm.
People are very interesting, that's true, and especially in those times I felt that something was beautiful in history.
Mm-hmm.
During
Yes.
my secondary school, one of the teachers had dealt one complete year on the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
But that, especially that, all those fighting and all those difficulties and murdering and guillotines and so on, that was so, if that was history, I didn't like it. So that had cut off those 1 year of French Revolution, and then the last year was spent on the parliamentary history of the Netherlands of the 19th century, ministry of Mr. So-and-so. That was so boring that I thought, well, history is nothing for me.
Okay.
But from the moment that I started studying geology, I felt that living now has its roots in the past. And from that moment I started reading history books.
I can understand.
To know what happened in medieval times in that area where I'm living now, and also, of course, what is the history of, the scenery, and also what is the history of geology itself,
Mm-hmm.
to see how did people study it. But it was not the answer on your question. It is that when I was a geologist and a scientist, my main interest was what is nature and how did it evaluate, and what is nature. So if I took a photograph of a scenery, I waited until all people were disappeared. Mm-hmm. That was man, and it was all those fighting men and all the troubles. I wanted to be into nature.
Yes.
So that was perhaps it didn't answer on your question. Afterwards, there was an evolution but it was long after that I saw this nature we are living in is geology, that's true, and it was my purpose, that was my work. But afterwards I saw that there were growing trees, and there were not only running water, but also towns, settlements, villages. And yes, that was made by man. And then I felt that, there must be some contact between them. And no, that's long after. We had the experience that nature was inhabited by man, changed, proved, you could say, but sometimes damaged. And that is, this is very short. It is now the work I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. So you discovered the necessity to include the human dimension,
Yes, but
even in your
yes.
quest for what is nature.
Yes, but after, rather late,
Right.
rather late. Yes.
But this is extraordinary. You told me Holland is a man-made country.
Mhm.
The landscapes of the polder.
Mhm.
There is nothing intrinsically physiographic about the explanation.
Mhm.
It is man-made.
Mhm.
So why then did you want to exclude man originally?
Perhaps because I had seen too much. We are crowded people, and I wanted to be abroad, to be in the forest, and then see that original nature. Yes, and that, well, in this evolution, perhaps another sequence was important. In the meantime, I was married. We lived after my study and after war, we had the possibility to work in the coal mines themselves. We had the geophysical service, but it was also possible afterwards to have people working as a mining geologist or coal geologist. In the same time, I was still working on my thesis, but I went down, and it was very interesting to be there and seeing the world inside. Well, there were no houses, bombed very much, so we were living anywhere in the upper floor of a house. For a few weeks we thought, it became a few years, and it was very inconvenient. But then after 2.5 years, there seemed to be a possibility to have a house, small house, part of a house, but where you could live a little bit more convenient. And that was something our director had organized, that in the moment of my thesis, that it was ready, he could offer me that house. Fine. But a few days before we could enter that house, I had a telephone call. I was asked if I should like to be to work at the office of the air photo interpretation in Suriname.
In Suriname?
Suriname. And sitting on the boxes for the moving over to that new house, I had this telephone call. So from that moment, there was a possibility to settle a little bit more convenient. Yes, and I had to make a choice. And, well, my wife agreed with it, but of course, the parents of my wife said, "Oh, this must be a disaster. Now you have the possibility to live in a house, and now you start again." And, well, I went to South America. My wife stayed some 3 months in Holland, with children, and, well, we started anew in Suriname, living in a small floor, some 11 months. But finally we had a larger house, and there we had the Suriname experience.
How many years were you?
4 years.
4 years.
And it was marvelous. We were lent out for 1 year, but we had the possibility to extend. And after 4 years we had to go back, because otherwise, there was no possibility to come back in the Netherlands. But that was a beautiful time. Not as luxurious as many people are living in tropical areas now, but there was no air conditioning in those times. But it was really marvelous to be there in the forest, to see, and that was the interesting thing, the whole world from above, with air photos. And in that period, although I was a geologist, I saw that all things are mixed together. There is a subsoil, the result of geological history. In this subsoil, you have the hydrological conditions. These are the conditions together for the trees growing. This condition is used by man with other principles. And so you see on the air photo the integration of the world. And one moment I never will forget, coming back by with an airplane of the American Air Company, sitting. I always choose a window seat, of course. I want to see the world. Making a landing, and then seeing this world of trees and trees and trees and trees on the frontier between the solid earth and the atmosphere. This growth of living things of origin, and that always I remember as one of the moments that I saw that all the things were sitting in a modern airplane, not a modern, it was an old-fashioned one, of course, but seeing this field, this interaction between the solid earth and the humid atmosphere.
That was
That's
kind of
geology.
discovery.
That is geography.
Yes, I should think so. You have then your conception of geography is this holistic one, and you even see that you can't be a good physical geographer unless you incorporate the whole complex of bio and anthropo elements. Yes, I'd really like you to go into that. You think Suriname was the crucial catalyst experience that
it was catalytic, yes. If I had not worked in Suriname, perhaps the same ideas would have come. But here it was easier to comprehend it, to see it. You saw that the influence of man was tiny, it was small anywhere. Somewhere there was no influence, and you could see the differences. And that. Perhaps I didn't realize it in that moment, but thinking about that afterwards, it was because when we came back to Holland, I was a quaternary geologist in the Netherlands, and then we were working out the principles of my thesis, together with our colleagues in the pollen analytics, and so we were building up, building up the Netherlands. There were some applied things in which we had to work together with people, with the influence of man, but I was working also a little bit for the Office for Pure Water Supply, but it was all technical. But in that time, the feeling of, the poetic part of life came in, and I saw that water, for instance, is a very interesting thing in poetry. And I made a short collection of poems on water, on sources and so on, and I published it in a magazine for water engineers. And that was a beautiful contrast.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. But water symbols throughout the world can tell a lot about a civilization as well as about water.
Indeed,
Yes. Have you continued that poetic streak?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I have a lot of examples of all kinds of poems. There's a group: earth, water, air, clouds, waterfalls. Travel. Oh, that's a very beautiful series. I should love to publish it on, the experience of seeing the world from above.
Oh, wonderful. You should publish that.
If I find a publisher, I would do it.
Is this all in Dutch, by the way?
The poems I am collecting are in Dutch, yes, of course, German, English, French. If somebody could point me some Italian, I have some Spanish. Oh yes, when I was in Norway, I found booklets, and having a dictionary with Norwegian, one of the two languages, I have really translated some of these poems on the fjell. Afterwards I asked a Norwegian colleague if I had done it in the right way. Beautiful things to be found there, yes.
Oh, that's very exciting. Do you think that is the just one, or is it the most important meeting ground of human and physical geography?
It's one.
It's one.
It is one, not the only, but it is one of the meeting points. You could say it's outside the field of geography, but it has to do with it. It is one of the backgrounds, and therefore I was very much interested in your lecture yesterday, in which poesia is about.
Yes,
I loved it. Yes, that's true. Another thing is when you are diving into a coral reef, then you are in quite another world. And I did, not in Suriname, but I worked also in Caribbean, in coastal coastal geomorphology, and we spent there, well, many months, but 3 months it was work together with an Amsterdam student. Well, living on that coast, working above and diving into the coral reefs, then you are quite in another world. I remember the first time, it was a trip also with my wife, coming back from Suriname to the Netherlands. We could spend a month on Curaçao, Aruba, Bonaire, in order to have to make some investigation on the air photos. They were never done, so we made a map of the whole area on the air photos, but in the meantime you have to dive. We did it both. It was just not with the beautiful things we have today, but with the snorkel and so on. But then you are floating on the surface, looking down into this blue, marvelous blue world in which the fishes are coming and looking at you, and you are looking at the fishes. And if you are, well, you have your air, so that you can do it for half an hour if you want. It is quite another world. And then if you are floating above a deep area, it is dark and you don't see what is down. Some 20 meters down, it's a deep blue dark. And then you put up your head and then you see your own world with fishes' boats, with trees. It's quite something else.
Isn't that so?
This difference is marvelous. Oh, sorry. Now I'm going to one of the poets in former British Guyana. In Suriname, I met one of the Dutch Suriname writers, Lou Lichtveld, and he said, well, if you are going to British Guyana, and I had to for business, please visit then Mr. Seymour. He is an somebody from British Guyana, and he is a good poet. Give him my regards, and I visited him. And we had marvelous talks with this local native poet.
Wonderful.
Beautiful. And he had also some poems that I have now in this collection. It's impossible to give them by head, but two of them. One of the earth sitting and seeing the world move around, is waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And the other is a specimen of physical geography. That is, I'm very sorry if I had knew that you would discuss it now. I had taken this poem with me to read it, but it is something like this. The little fish are moved in the waves that are going. But deep there, the space is unshaken. You know it, the waves are moving, the upper part of the water. This is the movement, but there deep down, it's the quietness is marvelous. And that is a specimen of, well, oceanographers can calculate exactly where is the boundary between, but this poet felt this difference between the restless movements in the surface of the sea and the quietness of the deep.
Oh, I think this is a fascinating subject. I think each civilization tells a lot about itself.
Yes.
In the way its poets speak of nature.
Exactly.
That's just more. But you have been also involved in very practical problem-solving kinds of things, where you still bring your integrated approach.
Yes. This work in Suriname was practice. It was a Bureau for Aerial Photography, and in that time the country was known and unknown. The only maps were along the rivers, and so it was mapped now. And we had this mapping work. Mapping, my predecessor, Simons, it must be said, had a very good idea, is something in which the things must be integrated. It was not understood always. There was a geological survey, a pedological and forestry survey and so on. But the idea to do the mapping together with the geologist, pedologist, and that was a very good idea in which the integration did not evolve as it must be, but it was a good start. Well, that was practical work, and so if there was a plantation to be made or something, the maps could be made using the air photos. So that was practical application of geography.
Yes, but from all your experience now of working with people from different disciplines and so on, different team projects, wherein lies the secret of having it emerge as an integrated product? What are the dangers? Is it enough to gather all the right kinds of experts and sit inside?
That is one of the interesting things. Yes, it's a very good point. If you put here an engineer and a geologist and other people together, then it depends on the approach of those people. If this engineer wants to do his engineering work as he has in his mind, and the botanist said, well, it's very interesting to be with you, but my interest is that, then, well, they are sitting together and they are quarreling. If there is a common goal, yes, one thing that must be done, and then it is discussed with the people, then sometimes the botanist has to say, oh, I don't feel that I can work in that direction. If that is still true, he must disappear and perhaps be replaced by somebody who said, well, it's true scientifically, it's not so interesting perhaps, but if I can help with my data, well, I'm very sorry, it's not so interesting for me, but working together, all right. And then he will find that his indications, if they fit to the other things, then he starts with the idea, yes, we can integrate. We have in the Netherlands had this same experience. After becoming a physical geographer, I saw that in the Netherlands, well, that's another subject, the social and the physical geography were well divided, separated extremely, but that's another thing. I also had the impression that if you wanted to be really a geographer, it was not only the map, like in former days, but then it was the integration that I saw in Suriname that must be studied. Well, integration between what? Geomorphology and social geography? Possibly, but that was not so easy. But if you see the landscape around you, then you see that the botanists are working, the planologists, the hydrologists, the pedologists. Well, if you could try to collect them and to see them working together, you could have a kind of, now not a geography, you never can say to a biologist, please work, and you are a geographer. You say, no, I don't want to be a geographer. So, in the plane of all those disciplines, everybody is working in its own sake, but if you are trying to have it in another higher, not an appreciation, but in another level, integration level, then you can have work together with biologists and the other people. But the experience is, we call it landscape ecology, but a name that has been invented by Troll as a part of geography. But if you say landscape ecology, studying the things together, is a part of geography, then the botanists and the pedologists say, especially in the Netherlands, because there are different disciplines, there's nothing. It's true that landscape ecology in that way is a field that can be studied from using the data from the different disciplines.
Mm.
But some of the biologists in the beginning of this period said, well, I am now working in landscape geology, ecology. Ecology is a word made by Haeckel. Haeckel was a biologist, so landscape ecology is part of biology.
Yes.
Always thinking in the same two-dimensional plane of 1, 2, 3, 4 disciplines, one aside of the other.
But what makes it work when it does work? It isn't just enough to call out the ingredients and even have generous and flexible human beings open to communication. It isn't just a matter of balancing out diplomacy between disciplines. What is it? Is it to have a strong intellectual core that all can agree with, a theory or a method or an approach that they all agree with? Or is it having a problem to solve? What is that one thing necessary?
Differs from the personalities.
Mm-hmm.
For myself and others who started this landscape ecological society in the Netherlands, it was, let's say, the scientific ideal to see the thing as a whole.
Okay.
And that way I tried to be a holist. Holism, we found this word, my brother and I. My brother started perhaps a little bit earlier with talking.
In what field? In what field is your brother?
Oh, he studied with Edelman, the same man that. But I learned heavy minerals from Edelman, especially. He was a little bit later when Edelman was in his pedological period, and my brother studied vegetation and soils together, both, and he wrote a dissertation on both, and that was ecology. Well, when we started this society, it was a kind of idealistic world, to see the whole world and the whole as one system, perhaps very in this poesis and very in this abstract world. Afterwards I saw that this must be the intention, but if you want to have a grip on this vague holism and the whole system, if you try to study it, you see parts of it. You only can attack it in one sector, knowing that it has connection with the other, but you must be, you must have the opportunity and you must be in the position to really to study that part and then see the difference. So then you come back to the bottom.
Yes.
But in that time it was an idealistic idea of seeing the whole world as one thing. But for other peoples, and I think that is still more important, it is to have not only such a theoretical approach, but having a practical question,
yes,
a problem.
Yes.
And that is a very effective reason to bring to bear. And that is why now in this society for landscape ecology, sometimes this kind of practical problems are the core of a session, and then all people are bringing in their own thing, and then you see it works.
And you don't need, let me go back. Ian McCarr wrote a very effective book called Man and Nature, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's very useful pedagogically. Would his approach be something that you would find useful in landscape ecology? All right, well then, this is now done by one man. The integration happens within the head of one person.
Mm-hmm.
Do you need strong leadership to make a team work? Or can it be done democratically?
That depends. How strong is the approach that has been put as a center? Mm-hmm. If you have the idealistic idea of let us now work together, then it depends very much of the intention of the people. And then you need a strong leader to have them together. And that is what, for instance, Edelman did in Wageningen. On the agricultural school, he was a very strong leader with brilliant ideas, with saying and moving and speech, and a whole group of scholars, of pupils. I mention Vink, for instance, my brother E.S. Zonneveld, Pons, and a lot of other people of an older generation who were his students, always say he was the man who preceded modern physical geography, because he, as a pedologist, saw that it was necessary to study the whole landscape, and then you can say this is used, it can be used for potatoes or something else, but he was just studying the landscape approach, and he was a leader, and he had all the people together. But in other cases, well, you need the strong one common goal, and that must be held together by somebody who could be a leader. That would always be better. But if not, you can, well, you are paid for working in that way, isn't it?
Right. Right. Well, I think we conclude this little conversation today. I would like you to express your hopes for this international network you are building on geographical synthesis.
Oh, my hopes in that way, or not mine. It's in the session of yesterday, I was very, very glad to hear Hans van Ginkel saying that now is the time for not uniting in the old-fashioned way of the different branches of geography, but the recognizing of the mutual interference of the ideas, especially when they have as a goal, well, the work on management of the surroundings, natural and cultural landscape, the environmental impact assessment, which is a very important thing as one of the ways in which work can be done. And I'm sure that in this moment geography is not yet working especially in that way, but they have to, they have to use their synthetic ideas, especially in this kind of work. Well, these needs of society are asking geography to be diligent, especially in that way, and that is one of the positive things of the pollution area we are working now. The geographers now can be focused on problems in which they are working together, and then you will see that the various disciplines of this very wide field of geographical approaches, each of them must be specialized in their own way, because they have to study the data at the basis, but they can then rework it and use it in the field of this application.
That is a fine model, I think, for all of us to have bear before us. So let's hope that some of this ambition for the field will be fulfilled. Thank you very much for coming today.
It was a great pleasure to have it. Thank you.
Hold on a minute.